Welcome to the Modern Monk podcast. This is episode number 9. I'm joined with Toby Chilver. How you doing, Tobes?
Hello. We're ready to rumble. We're feeling good.
Let's do it. My name is Cormac Taylor, and today we are talking about the fear of failure. So, as we always do, let's define some terms here. What does the fear of failure mean?
It means you're human. I think it's so key to just who you are as a person. You're human. You want to survive. That means you're scared of the unknown. When you don't know what could happen, there's always a chance that, I might die. That is like biologically how you're wired. So it just means if you fear failure, you're probably human. What I think it's a measure of is your tolerance for risk. Because when I think about failure or the fear of failure, I think about the amount of uncertainty that an action has. The greater that uncertainty, probably the higher the fear is. And so if we talk about having less fear of failure, I think it's being able to step into more uncertainty.
That's such a big one, isn't it? The uncertainty factor. And it never really goes away, but I think it's a core part of why we're so afraid is we don't know the outcomes. If you knew the outcomes of your life, there would be nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, and it would be really boring. I mean, uncertainty also gives you, excitement, and it gives you novelty. There's all these, awesome things that come from it. But fear of failure is one of those things that holds everyone back from doing probably the things that are most meaningful to them, because there's that uncertainty attached to something that's so fundamentally a part of them. And so having uncertainty around something that you believe is so solidified in who you are just creates even more fear, which makes it more difficult to start or to take action.
And you mentioned how it's part of being human. I think that's a very good point, because we're biologically programmed to be afraid of change, to be afraid of things, because the people who are more afraid took less risk and they were less likely to die, right? It's biologically who we are. And I think that was helpful, but I think now it is far less helpful, because it sometimes means that we don't take those risks that we think are going to change or improve our life in some way. And we try to hide in a space that seems safe to us, that seems comfortable, and can definitely prevent us from becoming who we want to become.
Yeah, we have outgrown the biology of our fear and risk tolerance. We think of, I want to quit my job. Your brain says, you're going to get eaten by a lion. Like, it's putting those two things one and the same to you. It can't differentiate. Your nervous system, how you feel, is reacting in the same way, the only way it knows how. In the world we live in today, it's not really useful for 90% of the things that we do or the things that we want to do. That fear is just holding us back. The other part of fear of failure is the outward aspect of failing. I think as a society, everyone has a really negative perception of fear. It's you lost. It's something that can, people point at you and rub it in your face. And that's really sad, because think of what everyone could do if you celebrated failures as an opportunity to learn and to be better, and a recognition of courage. Because to do the thing that then causes failure, that was an act of courage. It means that there was uncertainty and failure was an option, and you still decided to do it. That takes a bit of courage. Yep. But it's just a shame that what people love to do is just throw it back in your face and call you a loser.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but I think a lot of the fear comes from the uncertainty, but also comes from ambiguity. Use the quitting your job example, and how we associate, quitting your job with, we'll be ostracized from our community, we'll be kicked out, we won't have food, and we'll die, right? That's the way we're thinking about it. Our life will be over. But if you got very specific about it, about exactly what's going to happen every step, okay, I quit my job and then I start something new, and then it may or may not work, I'm going to continue. I'm probably going to figure some things out in the way. I'm always going to have food. I'm always going to have a roof over my head. My family is probably not going to, kick me out of the community, right? Everything is going to be okay. But when we are not specific about what's going to happen, we start catastrophizing, we start creating a bigger monster than it actually is, and that fear starts to expand.
Yeah. I mean, is that what you're saying? What is the fear of failure?
I actually took a while to think about this, and I tried to bring it down into quite a binary definition of failure. And I see it as the negative emotion associated with not achieving an arbitrary outcome in an arbitrary time frame.
Okay, one more time.
A negative emotion associated with not achieving an arbitrary outcome in an arbitrary amount of time.
Okay.
So there's a goal that you've set for yourself, which you've completely made up, and the time frame you want to hit is also completely made up. And there is a negative emotion associated with you thinking that you're not going to achieve that. That is fundamentally what it is. There are two big ones, in fact, one huge part of that, and that is the arbitrary timeline. Mm-hmm. If you did not associate an arbitrary timeline, a deadline, with that outcome, I think that fear of failure becomes so much smaller. Because if you said, or if I said, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to make $10,000 a month in 6 months, I'm really afraid that that's not going to happen. I'm very concerned. If I said, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to make $10,000 a month, I'm very confident that that is going to happen because there is no timeline that I've associated with it, providing all of this pressure and all of this fear. You can't demand of the universe when you're going to achieve a certain outcome. So why have you attached a deadline to that outcome that then significantly increases the fear and the risk associated with you not achieving that? Because if you don't hit $10,000 a month in 6 months, then what? Are you going to quit? What's going to happen, right? But if there's no deadline, then it's like, okay, I will continue to work until this happens.
I think most people are stopped by fear, which is why we're talking about it in this context of it's a negative thing that if you just reframe how you think about the action you're taking, you can remove the fear. And for 90% of circumstances, I think that's the best thing you do because it just means you start. And that, like we said in previous podcasts, is the most important thing. But I think it's also worth touching on the fact that you can use fear sometimes to create that sense of urgency, to get that thing done. But majority of times, the fear of failure is stopping actions that are leading to people not obtaining anything that they want from life.
Yeah, I completely agree. The action is going to be the catalyst for change either way. And fear is neither good or bad. It's just how fear influences your actions. So if the fear that you have is actually helping you take action, can you really say that fear is bad? If fear is preventing you from taking actions, then I would say that is probably a bad thing. If that is preventing you from achieving the goals you want to achieve and taking the actions that are going to allow you to achieve those goals, I'd probably say that's a bad thing. But if you have fear and for a certain period of time, that's what drives you to take the actions to achieve your goals, it's hard to necessarily say that that is a bad thing.
Yeah, I think you're almost toying with the idea of two fears that are opposing each other, like the fear of failure of doing it or the fear of not doing it. If that's the motivator, because it's not always the motivator, but it is quite a potent one, then use it to get over what is essentially another fear, Yeah, but I guess what I want to ask you next is if, failure is most of the time a bad thing, can you remove it completely?
Yes. I'm going to say yes.
Wow, okay.
And it's hard to say completely, but I think you can remove 90 to 95% of your fear of failure. And I think I've done that. Over the course of the year, the start of this year, I had an extreme fear of failure, which, to be honest, actually really helped me to take action. But I think I have nearly removed that entirely. I think there are 3 big factors that have influenced that. First of all, as I mentioned, if the fear of failure is a negative emotion associated with achieving, if the fear of failure is a negative emotion associated with not achieving an arbitrary outcome in an arbitrary time frame, if you remove deadlines on your goals, that removes a lot of the fear of failure. Having removed deadlines on when I'm going to achieve outcomes has significantly reduced my fear of failure. I set deadlines on inputs. There's actions that I have to take on a regular basis. There's deadlines to that. I don't have deadlines on outcomes. That has significantly reduced my fear of failure, firstly. Removing quitting as an option significantly reduced my fear of failure, because not only now have I not got a deadline, a time frame on when I'm going to quit, when I'm going to achieve an outcome, but I'm also not going to quit. How exactly do you fail? How is it actually possible to fail? It's very hard, because a lot of the time failure requires quitting. If you looked at someone building a house and they'd spent 6 months, digging up the ground, building the foundations of the house, it'd be very hard to go to that builder and say, "You've failed." If someone was building a house and they spent 6 months building the foundation and then they said, "This is too hard, I'm going to quit," that's a failure. But it doesn't matter how long it takes to build the house. The house will eventually get built as long as you don't quit. And I think that has been another big way that I've removed the fear of failure. And then thirdly, setting this equation, and it might have been 3 podcasts since I've talked about this, might have been my longest time ever, but I set myself an equation of, if I do these actions and I do not stop, it would be unreasonable that I don't achieve this goal. I set that action and I do not stop. I've removed quitting as an option and I don't have a deadline on the outcome. I honestly believe that has nearly completely removed my fear of failure. And when I thought about this question, I really wanted to say no, you can't completely remove it, but I think that's almost nearly removed it.
I'm a little bit blown away, because I was definitely in the no camp. But listening to what you've said there, you've changed how you define failure by first saying that I'm just not going to quit. You have that self-belief. That's, the iron, this North Star. So you've changed what failure is, and so then there's no longer a reason to fear it. Does that really mean you've removed the fear of failure, or have you just removed failure as an option?
Well, if there's nothing to fear, then you can't fear failure.
Yeah, I mean, practically it's the same thing. I guess the angle I'm coming at this from is, you're always going to fear failure when you try new things. When you're on the forefront, there's something novel, there's uncertainty. I'm now toying in my mind whether I still believe that to be true. I also believe that the things that matter most to me, I'm not going to quit. But I still think that I'm going to fear failure in other aspects of my life. And now I'm trying to think of why that is. Am I just not applying the same frame of mind to those ideas? Or
you may be associating fear of failure with just general fear. I'm still afraid of what other people think about me. I'm still afraid of certain things, but I don't consider that a fear of failure. And I think you think about goals in the same way as me. You don't have deadlines on your goals. You're not going to quit. So you may not have realized, but you may, in a lot of aspects of your life, remove that fear of failure. But you're still going to have the fear of, all right, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do something that no one else is doing, that I know. They're all going to say, "What are you doing?" They're all going to judge me. I'm afraid of that. But that isn't a fear of failure. That is just a fear of being different and being lesser in the eyes of others. But I think that is disconnected from the idea of the fear of failure.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I'm afraid of other people seeing me as a failure, or other people, thinking that I failed.
Yeah.
But that's a them problem. That's not a me problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a you problem if it's your closest friends and your family, and that's an unfortunate situation. But it really is just other people that are seeing you as a failure. Because you're chasing something that's maybe, you're not, because you've defined failure differently to them. you've also defined success differently to them. And so they can't, or you're not going to agree on when you're failing and when you're succeeding.
I think you've articulated that in a way that I didn't really understand until you said that. And I think that's that you're afraid that other people would perceive you as a failure. And I think that's so right. Because yes, I don't think it's possible for me to fear failure because I don't think it's possible, but I am afraid of others perceiving me as a failure. Yeah, I actually hadn't really thought of that, but yeah, you've articulated that in a way that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and we come back to that idea of like what are you in control of? Like you're only in control of yourself and what you think about yourself, and it is the most important relationship you'll ever have, is the one you have with yourself. So if you can remove the fear of failure, then that is the biggest obstacle. And you know, whether other important people in your life don't make the same shift, then you know you come to a decision about what that means for you and whether they really are someone who deserves to be close to you. But yeah, no, that's an interesting thing to keep talking about, because I mean next I want to talk about, when does a fear of failure influence you long term?
Fear of failure influences you long term if it influences your behaviors and how it influences your behaviors. If your fear of failure allows you to take actions that are moving you towards your goals, then it might improve you long term. But if your fear of failure actively prevents you from moving towards your goals, from starting a goal or for taking any action, then it is not going to be beneficial. And I think unfortunately, most people sit in the camp of their fear of failure is preventing them from taking actions. And I think the reason for that is that most people see the fear of failure and it presents itself the most when you're making the decision to start something new and start something different. I think it's less common for people to encounter a fear of failure when they've already started something versus when they're thinking about doing something. For example, if you're thinking about quitting your job and becoming an entrepreneur, your fear of failure is, I'm going to quit my job. This isn't going to work. I'm going to quit and I'm going to go back. That would be a failure. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of starting that new behavior. But it's very different if you've quit your job and you're an entrepreneur, you're doing the behaviors that are required of you, and you think, I might quit, this is scary. I think it's a bit less likely that you're going to stop taking actions, and a little bit more likely that it might help you to take the actions because you go, I'm afraid that I'm going to fail, and that means that I'm going to look badly in the eyes of others. I need to work, I need to make some changes, rather than I'm afraid this isn't going to work, so I'm not going to take the action. And I think when fear of failure presents itself most is in that moment where you're going to make a big change, and that is when it is very detrimental.
Yeah, pre-decision, you over-index on the fear of the outcome. Post-decision, your mindset is, well, now I have to make it work. And so the fear motivates you to try and make it work up until your tolerance point of, I can't do it anymore. And I mean, we've just said that there is no tolerance point at which I cannot do it anymore. And I mean, we talked about it in the previous podcast, setting standards that are low enough that you can stay consistent with. If that's true, you have standards that you can meet no matter how you feel, and you've agreed to yourself that you're not going to quit, then the only fear that exists is pre-decision, when you're over-indexing on, oh, but this outcome might happen and this outcome might happen. Oh, that's a really bad outcome that could happen.
Yeah.
But it all just exists in your head. I guess, I mean, we're talking about fear here. It is all in your head.
I mean, yeah, completely. Yeah. It is all internal. So how do you see it? How do you see fear of failure influencing you long term?
It's definitely the biggest roadblock, because leading with action is the most important step of the journey, the first step. And I mean, fear of failure is the biggest roadblock to that occurring. So it deserves a good amount of attention personally to be able to overcome that. But again, it's one of these things that's so fundamental, that's almost a set and forget unlock. That if you can negate or change how you frame failure, you can remove most of the fear of it. Yep. And then everything else it slots into place without this friction. And I think maybe what we talk about more often is the the uncertainty that comes with, taking a path less traveled. But we talk about it as just uncertainty of navigating the challenges, not of fear of failing the ultimate journey. Because I guess when you have a long-term vision for what you're trying to achieve and you're only focusing on the inputs, the only failure is not meeting your standard of doing the inputs or giving up on the first standard that you set for yourself, that was you're not going to quit, or you go back on that promise.
Yeah. And even when or if you fall below that standard, you don't hit the standard for your inputs, I don't think that means you've failed. Because for me, the way I've defined failure, and I think it's important for you to define what failure is, because it'll probably make it easier for you. But for me, failure is only quitting. So if you fall below your inputs, not good. We talked about setting standards in the last podcast, and the standard is absolutely something that you should not fall below. But the only requisite for failure for me is quitting. That if that is your only requisite for failure, then I think that it's very hard for you to have that fear of failure.
What do you think are some of the common failures that people see or people imagine for themselves when they're taking on new things?
I think people, particularly when they set an outcome, they think, I'm not sure I can reach this. Particularly when people have a over-optimistic view of what's going to happen, and then they get started and they realize it's a lot harder and it's going to take a lot longer than they thought it was. We talk about the life cycle of, you start off with uninformed optimism, and then you have informed pessimism, and then you go to the valley of despair, and then you come out the other side, right?
Usually you hang out in the valley of despair for a little while.
Yeah. It's a simplified model, but they don't show you the time. They don't show you that the x-axis on that. Yeah, but it does take a while. But that's definitely a big one, is not realizing how hard something is, how long something takes, and when it takes longer and is harder than you thought, and quitting is an option somewhat in your head, I reckon that's a big time that the fear of failure prevents itself. I think if you guys think about what are the big goals I want to achieve that I haven't started yet, and I would ask you why you haven't started it, and you're going to tell me 50 things that is not the main reason. Because I think for nearly all of us, the main reason is fear. It may not necessarily be fear of failure, although it likely is, but it is some sort of fear that's preventing you from taking the action. It's not that you're going to start a new job next year, or you're going to move countries, or something in your life is going to change and everything is going to be different. It is always failure at the core of it. And a lot of us are waiting for all the stars to align and to have perfect conditions. But the reality is, even when you do have those perfect conditions, the fear is still there, and the fear is still the number one reason. So you're still not going to take the action until you can overcome that fear. And I think it's always sits at the number one roadblock for why people aren't taking action in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I want you to run me through what that process was like for you, coming to the determining that quitting is the only failure, and I'm not going to quit. How did you get to that point?
So last year I had a full-time job. I was working in an accounting firm, and it was a job, right? It's a job after you finish uni, and everyone's like, great, you got a job. That's what you're supposed to do. And I was doing that, and I was really unhappy because I knew this isn't what I want for my life. I knew for a very long time I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So okay, this is not the life I want to live, but this is a path, right? This is a path that my life could go down. And the other path is I can quit and I can become an entrepreneur. The thing about the path that I was currently on is it guaranteed that I would live a life that I did not want to live. I knew that if I decided to quit my job and become an entrepreneur, at least there's a chance. And when I realized there was a chance, that's when I thought, okay, this is what I have to do. And then I really thought about what is stopping this from being my life. And I realized it was quitting. And then I realized, well, if I just never quit, then this will be my life. And it was really that simple. This is the only way this doesn't work, is if I quit. If I don't take the actions and I just quit. That is the only way this doesn't work. And when I realized that was the only way this will not work, it just allowed me to go, okay, I just have to never quit. I will withstand a whole lot of pain to eventually live the life I want to live versus living the rest of my life in pain knowing this is not the life I ever wanted.
Yeah. You almost like bank all of that fear of any other failure behind the belief that I'm not going to quit. So then any experience that you have to go through, challenge you have to overcome that's difficult, you can just lean back on, oh, well, if I quit, all the fear just comes straight back out. It almost like motivates you.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Oh, 100%. Because if you quit, you've failed. And that means that everyone else was right. All of these people that said, this isn't going to work, this isn't right, it's all going to come back. Oh, this life that I may have to live, this is going to become my reality. It is terrifying. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, when you have enough pain in your current situation, when the pain of change is less than your current situation, that's generally when people make the change. But being able to make change despite that fear being super high, I think is very important. It's very brave, because if you're waiting until the point where it is so terrifying that you have to change, it's just the easiest option at that point. It's just the easiest option. If it's the easiest option, then I don't see it as a courageous act, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this idea of what other people think about you, and that adding to the bank that you can draw on is, I keep calling it a potent fuel. And I think it's because everyone cares so much about what generally people think, and then even more about what people that are close to you think. And I think that it's useful when you can use it to motivate you through the fear of failure to living the life that you want to live, or taking action that moves you in directions you want to go. And I think being able to direct this potent fuel source is the difference between starting and not starting for a lot of people. But it's a really difficult thing to wrestle with, because they're the people you care about. Essentially, most of your identity is coming from what they think of you. Yeah. And so how do you go from someone who bases most of their identity off what their friends and family and peers and people at work think of them to, okay, now I only care about what I think, because I think that I can be this person and I'm not going to quit, and so all is good and well. Like, how do you go from that shift?
It's
hard to articulate.
It is hard to articulate.
Maybe because we're so strong in our belief that I am this person, I hold this belief, I'm not going to quit. You forget that there was times when you cared more about what other people thought about your successes and failures.
Yeah, well, in the podcast we talked about aligning your goals with you. We talked about how a lot of people set goals that are aligned with what other people think that your life should become. They say, oh, you should do this, this, and this. And because we have this general inclination towards wanting to appease other people, we're generally going to put ourselves in that boat. But one of the thought experiments I said that would be a worthwhile activity is to say, if everyone in my life that I cared about their opinion of died, how would my goals look? Would my goals look very different to how they currently are? And if the answer is yes, then you probably don't have goals aligned with you. And that's a very powerful exercise, because you're essentially saying, I care about my own opinion of myself above the opinions of others. And I think that gives you a big unlock to making changes to your life in a way that more suits the way that you want to live. And I want to talk a bit about that, because you've recently made the call that you're going to quit your job, you're going to go all in as an entrepreneur. And this was the big pivot moment where that fear of failure may have arisen. And so I wanted to just cover how you have dealt with that.
Yeah, I mean, we recently had a dinner where we were just reflecting on the year. And my big reflection was that I got to the point where I had enough self-belief that I didn't need any caveats to make this decision to quit my job, become an entrepreneur, and like chase the dream. Before coming to that realization, I had set myself lots of goals or things that had to happen before I could make that decision. But like you said before, that was really just fear of it not happening, or me making the choice and it going wrong and me having to revert. Those were stakes I put in the ground. Were like, well, if I do this thing, then it's less likely that I'll revert back, that I'll fail. And if I do that thing, then it's basically impossible that I'll ever go back and fail. And not only were those things not happening because they were outcome timeline-based goals, but I was just trying to dig an endless hole into which there was no more fear, and then this was just the logical next step in my life. If you're making a big life change like quitting your job, taking a less beaten track in life, it's never going to seem super clear. There's always going to be things that you have to work out once you've made the decision. And so I think once I had that realization that this was all just facade, it was just me making up things to suppress my fear. I was suddenly like, okay, what happens when I flip it completely? I'm okay, let's a thought experiment. I've made the decision, I'm going to quit my job. What then? And suddenly you unlock this ability to think through the whole timeline. Like what happens then? And then I don't make any money. And then what do I do then? And I get to, okay, well that worst outcome, it's not even that bad. And like when I think about it, I would almost still choose that over what I have now, guaranteed, that I know I'm not fully satisfied with.
Yeah.
And just that being able to realize that low point is not so far away from where you are makes stepping into the change so much easier. And I think that was the big moment for me.
Yeah, you were able to very much identify what was going to happen. We talked about how a lot of the fear is in the ambiguous. There's not a lot of fear in the specific. And I think because you allowed yourself to think, okay, this is how my life might go. I could do this. And then what? What's the worst case? And you kept playing out your worst case scenario, and you're like, oh, that's almost better than my current situation. And I think that was a huge unlock for you. It was like, oh, okay, I can do this. Even if I don't make, money for 2 years, I would still be in probably a better position. And one of the things that I've done, and I specifically did at the start of this year when I didn't entirely know what I was doing, is I just played out, okay, what is your worst case scenario? And I just played it down the line. A few years, what is your worst case scenario based on the current inputs you're doing? I thought, okay, in 2 years from now, what is my worst case scenario? If I make $0 on my business, okay, my entrepreneurial career, it has not started well, because bear in mind, there is no fear of failure. It's like, okay, based on my inputs, what's going to happen? Okay, well, I'll probably be in the best shape of my life. I will have run nearly 30 marathons. I will be able to speak 3 languages. I will have lived in 8 different countries with my best friend. I will have spent 3 years building and developing a personal brand. It's like, this is my worst case scenario. And the way I was planning out my life before I decided to become an entrepreneur was, okay, I'm going to stay in this job I hate for 3 years. I'm going to get my CA, my chartered accountancy, which I'm going to study while I'm working. And at the end of it, I'll have a few extra dollars in the bank account. I'll have a Australian chartered accountancy credential under my name. And that's kind of it. And I played it out and I was like, oh, wow. My worst case scenario really isn't all that bad. This makes it very, very easy for me to start taking action. I think that was the same for you, is you just realize how pretty good the worst case scenario is. And when there's so much ambiguity, we're just terrified of what our life could be. We're, going to get cast out into the streets. We're going to be homeless. We're going to be hungry. It's going to be terrible. Everyone's going to hate us. And you're, oh, wow. This is not such a bad case scenario.
Yeah, and I mean, this is linking so strongly to what we were talking about in the last podcast about living to your standards, because the only reason that you can say that my worst outcome is going to be this and it's not that bad is because you know that you're going to live to your standards and that's going to produce certain outcomes. If you haven't proven to yourself that you can maintain consistency, live to any kind of standard, you haven't proven that internally, you haven't had that identity shift, or you haven't done that enough times to where you believe that you can do it, you can catastrophize your worst case scenario and make it believable because you don't have enough proof from yourself that you will just figure out some little things and it won't all be terrible.
Yeah.
But that's coming from a place of a little bit of like self-belief that, okay, well, I know I'm going to do these inputs. I've built enough evidence that it is reasonable for me to assume that I will achieve these things.
That's a really good point. If you don't have a baseline of actions that you will always, if you have a baseline of actions that you will always take, then you can quite easily predict what your future is going to look like and what the worst case scenario is. Because in the previous podcast, we talked about standards, and the way I defined it was the actions that you take without motivation, the actions that you take at your worst. So presuming that your standards are very good, your baseline input is very good, you can very easily predict what your worst case scenario is. If you don't know what actions that you're currently doing, if you don't know what your standards are, then it is scary. It's very ambiguous. And as you said, you don't know. And it actually could be pretty bad. Like if your standard is just doing nothing, just eating terribly, spending all day scrolling, like you could very well just quit your job and do nothing. And then, probably have to go back to your job because, you're doing nothing in your life. But yeah, if you have that baseline of standards, of inputs that you're doing, it's very easy to predict what your future is going to look like. And it's very easy to make difficult decisions because the worst case scenario looks pretty good.
Yeah. No, it's important we kind of talk about that timeline of progressing that level of self-belief to be able to get to this point. And it kind of ties in with what we're talking about, removing the fear of failure. Like there's shoulders of giants that we're standing on to be able to proclaim these things. But it's important we mention them because, it's all part of the journey to get to that point. But this is such a huge hurdle, this fear of failure. So if you can get to that point and then have this realization, like it's just such a huge unlock for what your life could potentially be. It really just unlocks, a new horizon when you can remove that fear.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to play it out, because a lot of us don't see things as possible. But a lot of the time, it could be an outrageous goal that you have, but if you just actually thought about it and just, poker faced it and went, all right, this is my goal, and then really just thought about how could this work, how could this happen, you'd be pretty surprised on what you can achieve and what is actually possible.
Well, just think about how many times you think something has been impossible and then you or someone else has done it. Like it happens countless times, and it's just all these beliefs that you hold in your head that you think are impossible. But, the more you can prove to yourself that, okay, well, I thought that was impossible, but then it was possible. You're indexing your mindset to be, oh, well, I can take this risk, or I should make this choice because, there's outsized returns that can be made. Like we all have the unfortunate brain chemistry that over-indexes on the fear of negative outcomes and under-indexes on outsized returns that can come from these types of decisions.
Yeah, completely. Okay, well, we spent a bit of time on that question, but I want to say, what is something that you've feared in your life and you've overcome?
I want to say there's countless examples, of course, but one that I want to hone in on that came to mind was after completing the build of our first camper van. So we built a camper van that we had as a rental. It was a business venture, and it had taken us 4 times the amount of time that we thought it had, and it'd been really difficult. Lots of fear of failure, lots of pushing through difficult things we didn't know how to do. And then we'd built the van, and it was ready. Someone had said they wanted to hire it. They'd paid us money. And I had just thought that there would be no more fear from this point. I thought I'd been through the worst of it. I'd been through the ringer, day in, day out, trying to build this thing, just overwhelmed with fear. And then suddenly I had to go meet up with this person and hand them over the keys. And I still had fear that it all just like came rushing back, that, the van was going to fall apart and they were going to have a terrible time and like this was all a bad idea. And it really was just the fact that it was the first time that I had to do this thing. I had to hand over the keys, do the interaction, walk them through. And once I'd, been through that experience and it was a positive one, I was suddenly like, oh, that was so stupid. Like, why was I building that up as such a big thing that I didn't think I could do, when really it was a walk in the park.
Yeah.
It was just another reminder to me that there's always going to be fear when there's novelty and uncertainty. And the more you remind yourself on the other side of that I did fear that and I still did it and this was the outcome, just the more evidence you give yourself to do it again and again and again. And I think the more you do that in life, especially like, I feel like the later on, most people just stop doing that. The more you can do that, just the better off you will be, because you'll fail more often, which is great. You'll learn more and you'll become a better person. You'll also win more often, which just means you'll get more things than you want from life.
So one of the big things you said there, which I want to hone in on a bit more, is building up that proof, building up that evidence. You've done something that was difficult, that you were afraid of, and you took action and you actually did it, right? So you've done that once. You now have a bit of evidence that when you take action on something that you fear, it's all right. You get some sort of outcome, and then you do it again. And if you win again, or if you just take action despite the fear, that's another piece of evidence. And if you build up this huge mountain of evidence, it's hard to go into some sort of endeavor where you encounter this fear and not go, look at that huge mountain there. Why am I afraid of this? Or you go, I felt this fear, and as a response to the fear, I've taken action. And it has been fine every time. Everything I've been afraid of has never, ever been as scary as it was played out to be. I mean, have you ever had something that you feared that has genuinely been more scary after you faced it?
No, nothing comes to mind. It's always the other way around. Yeah. You always make it bigger in your head. And I think that we're biologically wired to do that. Yeah. And it's just unfortunate because the opposite is true.
I think if we can make the mountain of the evidence that when we face fear, we win, bigger than the mountain of the monster of the fear itself, it makes it very easy to take action through fear.
Yeah, and if you don't even see it as you have to win, it's just by taking the action, you reduce the fear. Like, it went away. Whether you won or lost is kind of irrelevant. It was just the rep of, oh, well, there was fear, I walked towards it. There was fear, I walked towards it. The outcome happened. What, was it better? Was it worse? It's probably not as bad as you thought it was. Okay, that's more evidence. Like, whether you won or lost doesn't really matter. It's just the reps of, okay, I walked towards the fear, I walked towards the fear.
Depends how you find winning, but if winning is just taking action through fear, then you'll win every time.
Exactly. Okay, so tell me, when was the time you were afraid? When did you overcome it?
The big time that I was afraid, the biggest time I was afraid was recently when I decided to put myself out on the internet, essentially. Before this year, I hadn't really posted anything. I was basically non-existent on the internet. I was a bit of a ghost. I was a ghost. But I thought, okay, I want to build a personal brand. I think this is one of the highest leverage activities that you can do. I think this is going to help me move towards the kind of life that I want to live, have the impact that I want to have. So I realized, okay, well, if I want to do that, I got to start posting. And so I thought, okay, that'll be easy. And I had spent a week recording content, doing one thing every day. And then I was like, okay, I want a 1 week backlog. So at the end of this week, I'll post the first piece of content. And it was all edited, ready to go. All I had to do was click post. And I just remember the mountain of fear I had. I was absolutely terrified of taking action. It was just terrifying to me. But I thought, okay, you've quit your job. You've gone all in on this. You cannot stop now. So I took the action and I posted. And, it went out there. It got some views. A lot of people had a few comments about it. And then what happened? Well, I posted the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And then started the YouTube channel. That was another really scary thing to do because posting a 15-second clip on Instagram is a bit different to posting a 10-minute YouTube video. But I decided, all right, I'll start doing that. And I did that, and that was really scary. And then it was a little bit less scary, then a little bit less scary. And doing that process was incredibly difficult, and I was really afraid at the start. But as soon as I realized that I wasn't going to quit, it was really exciting for me, because now all the failures are just adding little elements, little layers to the story. The more hardships, the more that I struggle, that I'm in the weeds, in the valley of despair, the better the story becomes. Because I know I'm not going to quit, it's really exciting for me now. And it's a huge way that I overcame that fear. Of course, it was through action first, and then continuing to take action, because it took a while. It was still scary for a very long time. But knowing that I wasn't going to quit was a huge relief, because I was like, okay, these are the actions. This is my worst case scenario. I'm not going to quit. Okay, cool. Now this is just adding to the story, and this is really fun. And it was probably the most scared I've been in my entire life doing something, but it has been the most worthwhile thing I've done as well.
Yeah, and I think maybe the reason that it was so fun and exciting for you is because this was something that was so core to your identity. You're essentially just putting yourself out there. You're being vulnerable in such a heinous place, the internet. Like, you're opening yourself up to, all breadth of whatever. The flip side of that is going to be just as positive as, what you're bargaining with. You're putting yourself out there with your identity, which is a lot less than just, a bit of money or a bit of, time. And so it makes sense that the rewards that you felt doing that were outsized.
Yeah, no, it's very, very strong character building. One of the podcasts that we did recently was talking about leading with action. And we spoke about how there's this huge thing right now where we're trying to avoid getting the scars. We're trying to learn the lesson without the scar. And sometimes getting the scar is the best thing you can do, because it's what builds the character and it makes you who you are. And I think going through those hard periods, doing the action, even when it's really difficult, it might be a little bit painful, it just builds you up as a person. And it's invaluable. If I posted my first piece of content and I got 1 million views, and then my second got 2 million, and then I just blew up, I wouldn't have that same character development that you get from the humble beginnings, humbling yourself, and then, continually trying to improve over time and making it slightly better. Just, it's something that you cannot really put a price on.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a great story, and it will continue to only become a better story to tell as you progress as a person, being able to reflect back on this moment. So yeah. No, it's really cool. But I also want to know how your fear of failure has continued to change over this period.
It is just changed to, this is going to add to the story. That is just how I see failure now. It may sound cocky or arrogant. At this point, I just see myself, I see my life as a story. I see my outcome as defined. I will achieve this outcome because I will not stop. Therefore, all of my failures is just adding to the story. It's just adding to the character arc. And it's fun now. When I fail, it's like, oh, this will be a great thing to tell. And a lot of times, you know how people will say, oh, we'll laugh about this one day. I'm laughing about it in the same day. Honestly, I just, knowing that I will not quit just makes failure such an interesting thing, because it just adds layers to you as a person. It builds up your character, it adds to the story, and it's just fun. It's completely changed how I've seen failure. But again, that's just come from removing the deadlines on goals, removing quitting as a possibility whatsoever. Because now it's like, cool, I'm just adding to the story. This is exciting, this is fun. I get to tell this, I get to say this as part of my rise to the top. I went through this extra trial and tribulation. It's just cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so inspiring to hear you talk about it in that way, because at one point in your life, it was having the opposite effect on you. Like this fear prior to, any of these mindset shifts was causing you to do and live a life that you knew you didn't like, and was probably creating like a relatively angry, like bitter, resentful person. And like now, you can sit here and say that you almost look forward to failing and you enjoy the process of it, because you just have this underlying self-belief that you're doing the thing that's true to you. and failure isn't an option. So it's just a lesson. It's just something that you look forward to.
It's
really cool.
It is a lesson. And again, probably in the leading with action, we talked about the learning cycle, which generally involves taking an action, failing, and then adjusting. The more times you can fail, the more you can learn. The quicker we can go through these cycles, which just means you can learn quicker. So this whole fear of failure thing, if quitting is not an option and failure just becomes a part of you and your story, then we want more of these failures. Now, you shouldn't be actively trying to fail, but you should be actively taking actions that may cause failure, because they will cause learnings and growth and changes in your character, which is very, very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about how fear of failure has changed for me recently, its fear has become an indicator of low-hanging fruit, of easy lessons to learn. If there's something that's I feel fear about that is within my capacity to lead with action, I'm like, great. If I just walk towards that, I'm going to learn so much about myself and the thing I'm trying to do by just attacking it. And so it really has become like an indicator of like, okay, that's almost like where I need to go a little bit. Like I need to stick my nose in there. I need to poke my finger through this mile-wide, inch-deep wall of fear, because on the other side, there's going to be really low-hanging fruit, easy lessons to learn.
So you've unlocked a huge amount from your reframing of fear, where you now see it as very much a catalyst for action, which is a huge reframe, because it's going to allow you to go through those quick iteration cycles, drive through fear, which may be blocking and preventing you from taking action. And that is going to have big long-term impacts on you.
Yeah, and it's still a continual process. Like I wish I could sit here and say like, oh, I feel fear about something, and then the next moment I'm doing it. Like there is still periods of weeks where sometimes I have something in the back of my head, I know that task on my to-do list is scary and I've put it off. Like it's a continual battle. You're never going to be, completely perfect with it, but just coming to the realization, building more evidence that the more I poke at fear, the better I get and the more I get from it, just makes it an indicator for me as something to walk towards.
And you've probably only really started to take on that new appreciation, understanding of fear recently, which means that you've only started to throw some stuff on the mountain of proof and evidence. But the more you continue to do that, the bigger the mountain of proof gets, the easier it gets to actually take action through fear. If you think that you've only been doing this for maybe a year and a half, then okay, what's going to happen in 10 years? Like that's a whole mountain of evidence that you now have. It's now a whole lot easier for you to take action through fear. That's just going to keep compounding and benefiting you more and more and more. And I think a lot of people have the opposite, where they fear something, so they don't take action. And then the next time they feel fear, they know, okay, this is my default response, is to not take action. I now have a mountain of proof that every time I feel fear, I don't take action and I stop. It's going to be very hard to do anything through fear, but you're just doing the opposite. And you're starting, and it's going to start building and building and building and building and building. We're both in the same position now, where we're 2 weeks old, really. We're not far through. We haven't done this for a huge amount of time. So we haven't even really started to unlock the positive effects this is going to have long term.
Yeah, and I mean, think about it the other way around. Like I can I can recall even just like talking to other people's grandparents or just having conversation with older people that are so stuck in their ways, so controlled by fear that they're unwilling to try a new thing or take on new information or change a behavior. That is, every time I come across that, I think this is not who I want to be. Like I don't want to become this 60-year-old who can't, change what I eat for breakfast or an idea I have about a topic.
Yeah.
I want to stay flexible and be able to, change how I think and learn new things. Mm-hmm. You're only going to be able to do that when you can face the fear of, well, maybe I've been wrong for 20 years.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have the mountain of evidence to lean back on to then switch that, you are just going to end up stuck in your ways and not taking on any new experiences, which is not how I want to live my life. So it's been great to go through this experience now, because I can see down the line in 40 years time what that's going to mean for the possibility of who I can be as a person and how I can still be adaptable, flexible, learning and keep that mindset and keep adapting and changing.
Yeah, you have to be dynamic. Like a lot of people, when you spoke about the people a bit older and they are confronted with either questioning their current beliefs or just something that is different, and you can see it, like you can almost see just the shutting down of like, no, I do not believe this is not me. Being flexible and dynamic. I actually think a lot of this comes from not holding close to you a huge amount of beliefs and things. There should be a few things that are incredibly core and intrinsic to you. One of the things for me, I used to be really into politics, and I used to have a lot of strong beliefs when it comes to politics. And when I thought about it, really all it was a overexposure to certain opinions for a long enough period of time that it became what I thought was truly core to who I was. But then a few years later, I question them and I go, wow, well, I guess I don't even believe this at all. And I think the less things that you truly hold core to you, not only is it that the things that you do truly hold core are very much a part of you, but also the more agile and flexible you are to changes and improvement over time. Because if you're very stuck in your ways, there's only so much that you can improve, only so much you can change. If you don't change anything about you, anything about your actions, you will never change at all.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think people are so afraid of just saying, I don't know, to questions. They just will latch on to what was the last opinion that they semi-agreed with, and they'll stake that in the ground. This is what I believe. This is now what I will argue about. And then the more you do that, the more you just fuel the fact that that is now something that's part of your identity. In reality, you don't know. You haven't formed an opinion yet. Like, especially, I think about myself, 24 years old. I really don't know anything about hardly anything. For me to go out there and start shouting about, I believe this and I believe that, is really useless, because I just don't know enough to know really truly what I believe, except for the things that are so core, fundamental to my identity that I'm fully in control of. Like, I haven't had enough experience or thought about anything else deeply enough to have a real opinion worth sharing that's not about me yet. Like, there's still so much more self-discovery to happen.
And it's a very brave thing to be able to say, because I think a lot of people try to say, oh, I'm very smart, I know all these things. But it's probably one of the smartest things that you can say is that I don't know. There's very few things, I'm the same, there's very few things that I truly do understand. And I think a lot of people are that way, but they just think they understand it, they think they know. There's a few things that I'm very much, this is who I am, this is core to my beliefs. For example, dopamine rewiring is basically the one. Other than that, I have very few things that I hold close to my chest, because I even think about the diets. You know, I've been through so many different diets, and every time I, for example, go on an animal-based diet, I'm like, oh, this is what I'll do for the rest of my life, because this is absolute gospel. And then like 2 months I'm doing the vertical diet, and then 2 months later I'm changing it again. And it's like, well, maybe I don't know enough to hold this as close to my heart as I think. And to be so vehement in your views about so many things, it's like, how much do you really know about this? Or is it that you're just screaming the loudest? That doesn't mean that we should listen to you the most.
Yeah, no. And like, I want to get into like what my 3 steps would be to overcome a fear of failure. Because the first one is identify as the beginner, which means say, I don't know, or truly be okay with the fact that you are the worst person in the room and that you are going to fail and people are going to laugh at you, and like, be like, well, that's okay because I'm a beginner. Like, that's what's supposed to happen. I'm I'm not supposed to take every correct step, avoid all of the pitfalls. I'm a beginner. I'm supposed to make mistakes and I'm supposed to fail sometimes. I think the more you can identify with that archetype as part of your identity, just makes it easier for you to attack fear and reduce this fear of failure that's stopping the action. I mean, the other thing I think about failing fast, failing often, and failing publicly. I think the more you get used to that exposure therapy of, oh, I failed in public, and you put yourself out there and you failed, that's where most of the biggest demons are. It's what other people are thinking about you and your failure. So the more you can see, oh, I failed publicly, and they think I'm a failure. Oh, but what am I going to do now? Okay, well, I'm going to take this action again, or I'm going to, try again with a different perspective. Like, you just get repetitions of, it did not serve me to care really deeply about what this person thought about this outcome. And I think the more you can do that, the better your relationship with fear of failure will be. And the last thing I have is to actually change a behavior before you try again after a failure. Like, we talk about this, what is learning? It's same conditions, different behavior. And so it's all well and good to be the beginner, to be failing often. But if you're not actually changing at all, you're making the same mistakes, the same failures over and over again, you're only kicking yourself in the foot, in the ass.
Yeah.
You're missing the one thing that needs to change to turn this wheel that's stuck in a rut into one that's racing uphill and doing amazing things for you.
I hear a lot of people that say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Yeah.
You want a different outcome, you need to change the inputs. Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay. Well, I want to know, what are your 3 things that I can do right now to overcome my fear of failure?
Okay. First of all, I generally start with your goals. What are your goals? I think you need to choose a goal that you are certain that you want. Now, one of our podcasts, which I believe is titled Aligning Your Goals with You, we specifically talked about having a goal that is true to who you are. Because if you set yourself a goal and you achieve it, but it was not really a goal that you wanted, it was a goal that other people wanted for you, you are not going to feel very fulfilled. It's not going to feel very good. You need a goal that is specifically aligned to who you are. Now, I talked about the thought experiment of pretending that everyone whose opinions you care about died. How would your goals look? These are good goals to work towards. But choosing a goal that you're certain that you want has to be the first step. Then removing deadlines for whatever that goal is, removing any deadline associated with that outcome of what you're trying to achieve, and also removing quitting as an option. This is why I think choosing a goal that you're certain you want to achieve is really important. Because if you're not certain that you want this goal, that unlocks the possibility of quitting. If you think, I'm pretty sure I want this goal, you might quit because you might realize you don't want that goal. That's why you have to be super certain that you genuinely want this goal. That's why I put a lot of emphasis on that. You need to know what your goal is. But after you do that, after you say, okay, I truly, truly want this goal more than anything, removing the deadlines and removing quitting as an option, step 2. And then step 3, set the equation. If I do these actions, it would be unreasonable that I do not achieve my goal. That is really how I've removed my fear of failure. Choosing goals that I know I just want more than anything in the world and I will not quit on, not attaching a deadline to it, and setting myself an equation of the inputs that are required to get me to my goal, no matter how long it takes. That is how I removed a huge amount. I will say I basically removed my fear of failure doing that.
Yeah, no, it's powerful. And you're setting that goal that is truly aligned with you is something that a lot of people get wrong, especially a lot of people that success comes quickly to. I think you can kind of see the archetype of the person who has some early success but then is unfulfilled and maybe tries filling their life with other things. So to anyone out there, myself included, who hasn't had success come quickly to them, look at it a little bit as a blessing, that it means you are truly aligning what you want with who you want to become in a way that you will achieve it and feel fulfilled by it and not have this empty, bottomless pit which you have to fill with other things.
Yeah, the more I think about it, getting success early is absolutely a curse, because if you're required to do a huge amount of actions to get your goal and it takes you a really long time and you go through a huge amount of struggle with where you are, the fact that you're not achieving this goal, but you continue to work through that pain, through periods of low motivation, and you continue to work and eventually you achieve that outcome, I think that is, over a long time horizon, a blessing. Because if you get the outcome straight away, you've never had time to question whether you really, really want that. You've never had time to prove to yourself that you're willing to do whatever it takes. It is, if you think that, oh, I just want to get this as quickly as possible, sometimes it can be the worst thing that can possibly happen to you.
Yeah. I mean, time will tell. I guess we will see soon enough.
We will. All right. Well, that was episode 9 of the Modern Monk podcast, The Fear of Failure. We're going to move on to a Q&A in the Modern Monk community. So if you would like to join the Q&As live, if you would like to watch the podcast live, or if you would like to watch this and see it when it comes out rather than 30 days later, like you're probably seeing it right now, then you can join the Modern Monk community for free. I will leave a link in the description below for you to check out, or you can go to school.com/modernmonk. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.